having held this trauma for so long, finally just let go. And that's the power of psychosis. All the tension was just finally being released.
This week's guest is Louisa Dent Pearce.
Age 36, I had a major psychotic break. I couldn't cope with life. I couldn't function. I couldn't work. Actually, what I wanted was like a shaman to come find me and take me away to a village and teach me how to be a healer. And this woman looked up at me, and her name was Janet. And I get teary because Janet changed my life. Freedom requires deconstructing that story and then creating something new for yourself.
On your YouTube account, there's a video that's called Essential Components of Healing.
If you're going to watch any of my videos, that one might be a good one.
Hello everybody, welcome to this Peer for Peer podcast. Peer for Peer podcasts are dedicated to conversation and storytelling about peer work and the people with lived experience in the mental health industry. My name is Robert Nobilia, and this week's guest is Louisa Dent Pearce.
Hey, how you going, Rob?
I'm very well, thank you. Nice to see you too. Louisa, amongst so many talents and skills, you are an author, mental health peer worker, social worker, teacher, advocate, just to name a few. And I noticed this amazing quote on your website. Your website is The Voice Sanctuary, but we'll get to that later. But the quote is as follows: that voice in your head, that story in your heart, that belief in your bones, you can change it. And when you do, you will know freedom. And my question to you is, what is freedom? And is it achievable in varying degrees?
Whoa, that's a deep dive. I love your question. Gosh, it's a challenging question to answer because, it takes me really deep within. I think I've been contemplating that my entire life, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. I think a lot of us think about this and what does it mean to walk on this earth in a way that we would like to walk. I guess that's freedom, isn't it? Where we can be sovereign and in charge of our path, our destiny, or at least I'll say co-create with the universe or the powers that be or the higher power, because perhaps it's a bit arrogant to think that the world will be exactly the way we want it. So finding that beautiful middle balance between, living the life you want to lead and also working with humility with the cards that you're dealt. Perhaps that's my definition of freedom at the moment. That's kind of coming to mind. But the reason that quote is there is because I think what gets in the way of freedom for people is the voice in their head, the story in their heart and the belief in their bones, which was always only ever a construct. It's something that's constructed for us when we're children and then by us later on as we become adults and we're responsible for that story. So, I find that freedom requires deconstructing that story and then creating something new for yourself that is beneficial.
Thank you. Yes. And based on your lived experience, okay, so at what age or stage of your life did you first encounter mental health issues, and could you describe the impact it had on your life?
The first time I remember being seriously unwell, puberty or sort of early teens, 12, 13, 14, that kind of age, which is, when it's one of the hardest stages to go through. I've now, having studied social work, understand the life stages of development, and it gives me a deeper appreciation for how much help I needed at that age, but the help just wasn't there. So I do remember feeling very alone, feeling very suicidal. And the biggest a major trauma in my life was immigration. My family moved from South Africa, where I was born, to New Zealand, and we're a typical family. We didn't really talk that much about feelings, and I never received any counselling for that, or there was no sort of addressing of the cultural bereavement that happened from uprooting yourself from your country and your culture and everything you've ever known. And then that age, particularly being so vulnerable, like needing to fit in, needing to belong, needing to find my place in the world. So I guess I never had a great foundation anyway. I know that as a very young child, I didn't have what's called secure attachment. I didn't, that's fundamental for people's well-being is to have a secure attachment to caregivers, and it wasn't there for me. So the foundation was already shaky. There were already cracks in it. But then come along this major trauma at age 12, the cracks got deeper. And then I, did what most people do. I just tried to cover up the cracks, paste it over, get on with life, make the most of it that I could, cope in any way I could. That's called survival. We just all do it. But they really began to show again in my early 20s. And that was when I first started really hearing voices that were problematic, and going into episodes of, I guess, kind of like a pre-psychosis, and I did get some mental health help then from psychiatry and a little bit of medication and stuff, but I wasn't really interested in why and what was driving this, and I just did a whole lot more pasting over, just band-aided the whole thing. Didn't want to look too deeply at the stuff in my closet, and then I had another major breakdown at age 36. So I couldn't run away from it, and I think that's something that I have learned is it's only when we really stop to look at our shadow side. You can't run away from your shadow. I love that as a metaphor, because your shadow is always there. It follows you around, and until you stop to look at it and go, oh, hello, shadow. What are you trying to teach me? What are you trying to say? That was when I really started my healing journey.
Yes. And did you have some experience in psych wards?
Yes, I did. In age 36, I had a major, what they call psychotic break. Total meltdown, next level meltdown. It's like the layman's terms for it. But I think psychosis is a fairly accurate term, because if you actually look at the root of that word, it means the psyche, like an eruption from the psyche. So it really was. It was like everything that I'd repressed in my subconscious, my inner landscape, all my feelings as well. It wasn't just beliefs and stories, it was feelings as well that were just stuffed down there. It just got too full. So it kind of erupted. And so it was a very dramatic entrance into what was now undeniably a mental illness experience, even though I have to sort of put quote marks around mental illness, because I was definitely ill. I couldn't cope with life. I couldn't function. I couldn't work. And I did end up in psych wards, as I'll get to in just a second. But I just don't agree that it's a pathological thing that comes from my neurochemical imbalances or anything like that. I felt always right at that moment, it was a spiritual experience that was causing me to be ill for a time period. So yeah, I looked for refuge with counsellors, and because I had a spiritual view of what I was going through, I wanted a retreat, or I wanted actually what I wanted was like a shaman to come find me and take me away to a village and teach me how to be a healer or something, because I knew that these things existed in other parts of the world, and I really felt that this was a healing crisis that I was going through. But the shaman didn't turn up, Rob. No. Instead, I did end up going to a psych ward after about 3 months of unmedicated psychosis, because I just couldn't ground myself. It was really scary and distressing for people around me. So I kind of had to just wave a white flag. Truce. Okay, I give up. Take me, mental health system. So that was the first of many hospitalizations. I lost count in the end. It would be over 20. that I had in about 5 or 6 years.
Sure. I know it's a difficult thing to answer so quickly, sort of thing, but what's your experience with medications? And, you know, maybe if you could take us through like your experiences with medication and then how you weaned off it, etc., whatever you'd like to say about that.
Yeah, sure. So as I described, when I got to the hospital initially, by the time I'd gone through 3 months of unmedicated psychosis, I was actually really, really grateful for the medications. To have something that I felt kind of stitched me back together, albeit in a rather superficial, artificial way, it gave me some space so I could explore what the experience meant. And I could also handle the therapy that I then went into, because I tend to do things in the extreme. And so I was intuitively guided to a therapy called primal therapy, which is to help you heal from childhood trauma, primal trauma, like the initial traumas that happen to you. So we're talking infancy, even in the womb, right? It's very hardcore trauma therapy. So I kind of needed medication to stay balanced, because the role I see medication having is one where it can sort of act like cotton wool. You know, it tranquilizes. That's what they are. They're major tranquilizers. So they tranquilized me enough so I could kind of get on with my life and do the therapy work that I needed to do. In saying that, I knew intuitively as well that I would always want to come off them. I was told I would be on them for life because I had a diagnosis of schizophrenia, and I was, you know, I don't blame the doctors necessarily because I seemed extremely unwell at that point, but I rejected that prognosis right from the start. And I'm so grateful I was supported also by my husband, who concurrently went on his journey, right? Of course, because, you know, you don't go through something like this alone. If you have a partner, your partner literally comes with you and lives and breathes everything with you. So he went on his own journey and looked into medications and was pretty horrified by what he found in terms of like side effects on the body, long-term efficacy is not good at all. Yeah, so he was very worried. We brought together our views, and you know, ultimately he let the decision be mine, which was wonderful of him, even though he was so worried for me. And yeah, I came off it probably fully about 3 years ago now. So I was on it for maybe 7 or 8 years. Yeah. And then I just gradually weaned myself off. It's a very complicated thing to get off. You know, it took a lot of dedication. I tried it on my own, which was a terrible idea. And in the end, I had to be kind of humble and accept support from, you know, compassionate and understanding psychiatrists. I went to hospital to come off it. I got the support I needed. I made a video on it actually, which goes through all of that in more detail, because I know that people get frustrated with their medication and they do want to jump off it. So I wanted to kind of share my hard-won advice with folks. Yeah.
Fantastic. And yeah, sounds like quite an ordeal, really, getting through all that. And so we may be skipping a little bit here, but you then encountered mental health peer work, right? Could you tell us how that came about and who was involved?
Yeah, one of my favorite topics. I love peer work. So actually, peer work came in early. It didn't come in at the end of this journey. Right. It came in right at the beginning. So running concurrently to this treatment I was getting in the mental health system and the therapy and all the other supports, my husband's support and lifestyle changes and all that kind of stuff, was peer work. And I would say it was critical because, so I have this memory that I love to share when I talk about peer work, but being at the time feeling so broken, like I just cannot think of a better word to describe it. I mean, I went from being a fairly high achieving, I was a book editor, I had my own business, I could function, everyone thought I was fine. I presented this really high achieving self to the world that looks quite similar to the self that's talking today. But the difference was that self didn't was so ill underneath. You know, I was so neurotic and tense and miserable underneath. So anyway, I went from that like high achieving version of self to this person who literally couldn't look people in the eye, couldn't hold a conversation, couldn't walk down the street, was shaking everywhere I went. My body, you know, having held this trauma for so long, finally just let go. And that's the power of psychosis, really. All the tension was just finally being released. But what it looked like from the outside was that I was this shaking, talking to myself, hearing voices, weirdo. I was walking around, you know. I even changed the way I looked because my voices were telling me to wear weird clothes, and there's just lots of crazy stuff going on. So picture that person finding a hearing voices group. I heard of this thing, the hearing voices group, and it was about 2-kilometer walk from my house where I was living. I couldn't drive or anything, and I thought, all right, I'm going to try. And I went like the back streets because I couldn't be around people. I was just it would aggravate the voices. You know, lots of people who hear voices get very isolated because of the experience. So I didn't want anyone to see me. So I took this like long-winded back route, got to the library, and this sums up peer work for me, because when I opened up, I stood at the door, and the door had like a window to the room where the support group was being held, and I must have been a little bit late or something, and I was like peering in through the glass like, oh God, am I meant to be here? And this woman looked up at me, and her name was Janet. And I get teary because Janet changed my life. I mean, lots of people did, but I'll never forget that smile, and I'll never forget how she saw me, and she must have seen how anxious I was. So she rushed up and opened the door and ushered me in, and it was Janet's warmth and love, and coupled with her understanding, because Janet had major schizophrenia for years. Janet had been where I had been. Janet understood, and Janet didn't see me as broken. Janet saw me as someone who really needed embracing and comfort and to be loved and somewhere to belong, you know. So that group gave me a place to belong for a while. And the healing that I got out of that whole, which, you know, I could talk about for hours, but just to kind of wrap that up, the healing that I got out of it has always since motivated my work as a peer worker. And that's how I started working as a peer worker, because I wanted to be like Janet, you know, I wanted to help.
That's a fantastic story, beautiful story. And so I'd say that actually inspired you to go on and study social work, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So tell us, you know, the importance of social work. Obviously, it is very important, but you know, the goals and values of social work and mental health peer work are, you know, for me, fantastic. I really love them. Could you go through some of those for us?
Sure. Well, social work is, I think, like a big sister to peer work, only because it's been around longer as a profession, or a big brother, whatever. And peer work fits in really nicely under the wing of social work. That they're very aligned. The values of social work, you know, respect for persons, professional integrity, and social justice. Peer work comes from a social justice background. It was born out of mainly here in Australia in the 70s, people that were critical of the psychiatric system, that wanted care, this includes carers and consumers, wanted better treatment, better outcomes, more rights. They saw that people who have mental health issues, their human rights get eroded, and still to this day we have huge problems with that, of people being enforced to have treatment. That's always been something that breaks my heart. So that kind of like activist human rights perspective is still there in peer work, because ultimately we are trying to well, part of what we're there to do is to change the mental health system so that it suits us better, so that it serves us better. You know, there's a lot of damage done to people in the mental health system. And all the evidence you need for that is the people who've gone through it and said, you know, hey, it's hurt me. So peer work can be a safe haven for those people who don't trust the mental health system. As a peer worker, though, I have always strived to weave the two together and to take what serves from the mental health system, because I think black and white thinking, us and them, is really sort of not that helpful. You know, there are plenty of people in the mental health system who have their own lived experience and who just don't disclose it. And so hopefully as peer workers, we're modeling authenticity, and we're modeling how to be real and how to just speak from the heart, and how to see another aspect of social work that I love is it's very focused on just being human together. You know, out of all the mental health professionals, social workers are the ones that go and sit with the homeless people in the homeless shelter, helping them, you know, have a cup of soup or something. I mean, that's what social workers are. Their boundaries are less rigid than the other mental health professionals. They're more likely to just come across as an everyday person, you know, and maybe share their story. So, and of course, sharing your story is so pivotal to peer work, is the hallmark of peer work, that you are able to share what you've gone through for the benefit of somebody else, not to vent, not to, you know, for your own, so you get a kick out of it, but for intentional purposes.
So telling your story, right, in any way you can, is that correct? Telling your story, there's power in telling your story through words as well as through art and music and so many other things. Is that right for you?
Definitely. Yeah, it's huge for me. You know, that's why I've written a couple of books now in my mental health journey. And I've got my videos that I do, you know, they're just like, it's just something I do from my heart. You know, it's not, I don't ask for money for that stuff. I just want to share. There's this compulsion to share, to help someone else. Yeah. So I think storytelling is powerful, and it's because I was a writer before I became unwell as well. So it's just always been, you know, something I love to do. And, you know, but writing is only one way to tell your story. And a lot of the work that I do with people is to help them tell their story in any way, you know, whether it's using creative art, or it's using story cards, or it's just sitting there talking about it with somebody. I think in and of itself, it's really healing to tell your story and to hear, you know, it's a two-way thing. It's to hear the story that you're telling when you tell it, or to see it if you've written it down or done an artwork. But it's also to have that story received by somebody, you know, because otherwise it's just a journal or a diary. So that's something powerful about that process of like showing someone else your story, or having it witnessed compassionately with love and non-judgment and validation. And we need that as traumatized people who come from backgrounds of trauma, which will have involved, no doubt, psychological trauma as well, which is to be invalidated, dismissed, psychologically abused, told that you're wrong, or you're bad, or you're not worthy, or you're unlovable, or, you know, whatever it is, or you're the crazy one, you know. So many of us, we're the black sheep in the family. So then to find your way to a peer worker or any mental health professional, who, because they all do this really well usually, to listen with love and to find a safe space for that story to be a reality. Yeah, that's one of the first steps in healing, I think, is to share your story somehow. It doesn't stop there, because as my website said, you know, retelling your story then becomes the healing. How do I retell this so that it has a gift in it, it has a lesson, it has some purpose, you know.
And tell us about your work with Peer for Peer, because this is exactly what people working with peer for peer does, right, for people.
Yeah, peer for peer has been like a pinnacle for me in my peer career. It's a nice little because I've got the social work hat and the peer hat on kind of at all times. I can't take the peer worker out of me, and I don't even want to. I love the work. And I got the wonderful opportunity to work with a team at Peer for Peer on the Sunshine Coast. It's a little like family business, this family-sized business, I should say. And it's authentically peer. That's what I absolutely love about it. It's not just, we're not trying to pretend to be another mental health service or provide support work like other organizations do, which is fine, and there's roles for that. But we are peers, and we know, hopefully, I'm hoping after like being a part of creating the workplace culture after a couple of years now, that it's the relationship that's so important between the peer worker and the client, right? We're trying to pair people up. It's mostly one-on-one support that we offer. And when we pair people up, we're looking for that kind of mentoring relationship where trust develops, where stories can be told, and maybe told for the first time. This is weird thing in mental health. It's like you're not allowed to do therapy and counseling if you're just a support worker. But the reality is, you're sitting there and you're going for a walk on the beach, you're spending 3 hours with this person or something. There's going to be stories told in that time, and often profound stories. So I like to empower our peer workers to be able to hold those stories, not to do trauma therapy and try and fix them, but to, be the compassionate witness. And it's pretty easy to teach peer workers to do that, I'll be honest with you, because they get it anyway. Like they already have compassion, and I think this is one of the most beautiful gifts of peer work is you already have compassion. You automatically have it because you've been there and you've done it and you're not judging.
Yes, compassion, very important, and so is self-awareness. Could you tell us about the importance of self-awareness as a peer worker and as a person in general?
Okay, that question, when I think of it, I kind of weave in because I've been working as as a mentor or a supervisor to the peer workers themselves in this role. And so what I always say to them is, your recovery is the teacher for you. You're going to learn, and part of that is self-awareness, right? As you recover, become more and more self-aware. You understand how you are. You understand where your story came from. You understand why you get triggered. You understand how to respond to your triggers rather than react to your triggers. So you learn all this stuff, and you just become more and more self-aware. It's a never-ending expansion that goes on. And then all of that stuff you learn as you journey yourself is the very things that you then give back to your client or the person that you're working with. So it's very important, for peer workers to be always growing and learning about themselves and never just go, right, that's done and dusted, I'm recovered, I don't have to work on myself anymore, because it's never ending. So I guess that's one of the joys of being a mentor for other peer workers, is they are, it's personal. You're going to bring your stuff to the job. So how do you do that in a way that's responsible, professional, authentic, intentional, and ultimately benefiting for the client?
And could you tell us, as a peer work, what advice you would give in terms of healing yourself? So I think I've noticed on your YouTube account, there's a video that's called Essential Components of Healing. Could you go through those for us? I think that's like you've told it very well, and I think it's a very important thing for people to heal themselves with, and in general as well. It starts off with the willingness or your intention, right?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. That is that video is well worth, just if you're going to watch any of my videos, that one might be a good one. Just because those principles, they don't come from me. There's 5 keys, by the way, 5 keys of self-healing, which is self-awareness, self-acceptance, willingness, responsibility, and focus or action. And there's lots of models of healing, and your eyes might glaze over when you hear those 5 things listed, but I do go into them in detail. And you're right to point out that the most critical one is willingness. And I just think that it all starts there. I think unless you really, really want to heal or want to change or want to transform, whichever, pick your word, or recover, it's not going to work. You'll go from, even if you're in so-called treatment or therapy, you'll just go from one therapist to another, sort of reenacting the same old patterns that you were before. It's a bit like with addictions, you might clear one addiction up and then all of a sudden you find yourself in another one. And I was guilty of that for years until I really, went deep in myself and went, I don't want to be like this anymore. I want to be happy. I don't want to be miserable. And so that kind of profound honesty with yourself then activates this willingness to change. And it's got to be there, because it's hard work. I quite often say in my trainings, I do some training for people who hear voices, and I say to them, there is a cure for schizophrenia, and it's called hard work. So there's no free rides, and that's the same as with absolutely anything in life, isn't it? You've got to kind of work for it. So willingness is a key. But if that word scares people off and they think of it like, it's discipline, and it's, because I did just say it was hard work. Another gentler word is the word intention, which is, it's just a softer way of saying the same thing, which is defining for yourself, what is my intention in life? What do I intend for myself? And then letting that be the place from which all your decisions come, all your actions.
And finally, Louisa, and I suppose it sort of stems off from your book, Spirit Gnosis. Could you please speak a little bit about the importance of connection in general? So connection to people, your own body, your emotions and thoughts, Earth, Mother Nature, as well as cosmic connections. And why is there a tendency for people to disconnect?
The reason we disconnect is from trauma. It's that simple, if I have to be, in a nutshell. Trauma means we don't feel safe. If we don't feel safe with our parents, in our family, with our spouse, on this earth, all of those things, we're just going to disconnect. It's a trauma response, right? And it's a survival one. It's very clever. We're so clever. The human body knows how to, keep itself safe until it can do the healing work. The reconnection process is about beginning to finding ways to feel safe in the body with yourself. A lot of people don't feel safe with themselves. That's why they drink. That's why they, binge watch Netflix, because there's no safety in my experience right now in this present moment, because difficult feelings come up, or it's a habitual sort of terror of what's inside me. So connecting is definitely about connecting within. I think nothing's ever linear, really, right? We sort of do a little bit of it. It's like we rewire some of those connections within, and then we maybe rewire some in relationships. But ultimately, I think a whole, well, and healthy person is one who is connected within and without, and is able to, you can transpose that word connect with other words like love. One who is able to love oneself is able to love the world and others. One who is kind to oneself can be kind to others, And again, there's your intention, because if that's what you intend for yourself, your unique and perfect and beautiful recovery pathway will unfold before you. And you have to then trust that, like you start with your intention. You're like, I would like to connect. I would like to be connected to myself. I'd like to be connected to higher power. I would like to be connected to the earth. I'd like to be connected to my family, whatever it is you choose. And then allow that aspiring wisdom to come up, right? It comes from within and it guides you, and you follow that. And one might even say that at the end of all that, you're connected to the moment. You know, your breath, just being here. And that's a really, really peaceful place to land.
Thank you so much, Louisa. Thank you so much for being with us today and answering those questions with such wisdom. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Rob. It's lovely to be on the show, and I wish you guys all the best with it. I think it's a great initiative for the peer world, and I hope that people really enjoy watching these. So keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Louisa.
Okay, bye.
Well, thank you very much for listening. This has been a Peer for Peer podcast. My name is Robert Nobilia. See you next time.